All right, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to OneClass. My name is Kevin, and today I'm going to be streaming some economics questions. A little bit of a background about me. I hold both a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in economics, and I also work as an economist. And what I'm going to be doing today is just going through questions that you guys have sent in. I will be reviewing what our junior tutors have had to say as to what the answer is, and adding in anything else that I think might be important. So we get going here. Looks like it's working okay. So first question is, what is marginal utility and why does it diminish? And our junior tutor said that marginal utility is the additional satisfaction that a consumer gains from consuming or purchasing an additional unit of a good or service. An individual's wants are unlimited in number, yet each individual's want is satiable. Because of this, the more we have a commodity, the less we want to have more of it. So as the amount consumed of a commodity increase, the utility derived by the consumer from the additional units, i.e. the marginal utility, goes on decreasing. This law is known as the law of diminishing marginal utility. So for example, if you're really hungry for dinner, what you do is you order a pizza, and that first bite of pizza is probably so good, you enjoy it. But as you go on eating, you're going to get to a point where you don't want to eat any more pizza. Either you're full or you're sick of the flavor or whatever. And so probably by your 6th or 7th slice of pizza, you don't enjoy it as much as you did the first one. That's diminishing marginal utility. So what that looks like graphed out. We'll put utility on the y-axis. In this example, I'll do quantity of money, how much money somebody has. And what this chart, or what this curve I should say, is going to look like is this. It's going to be pretty steep initially, and then as the quantity of whatever it is increases, whether it's the quantity of pieces of pizza you ate, quantity of money you have, the slope is going to decrease over time. And this makes kind of intuitive sense in that somebody, say, has $0 and you give them like $10,000. That is going to bring them a lot of additional utility because it opens a lot of doors for them that weren't previously open. They can do a lot of things they couldn't do before, whether that's food, shelter, etc. And as a result, their utility is going to increase a lot. There's now a lot of things they could do they couldn't before. But on the other end of things, if somebody has $990,000 and you give them an extra $10,000 and they now have $1 million, it's really not going to make a huge difference in their lives. There aren't many things you can do or doors that open from gaining an extra $10,000 when you already have $990,000. So while it will make them happier or give them more utility, the rate at which it gives them more utility will be much lower than it was for somebody that didn't have any money. So as we can see here, this person had $0, we gave them $10,000, huge increase in their level of utility. On the other end of the spectrum, and obviously this isn't to scale, but on the other end of the spectrum, somebody had $990,000, we gave them we gave them $10,000, and it made them marginally happier. And this is the same thing with pizza. That first bite of pizza is going to bring you a lot of happiness, but when you've already had 7 slices of pizza, you go for an 8th, it's not going to do nearly as much for you. Don't think there's anything else I want to add here. Let me just read through quickly. move on to question 2. Sandra waited before she bought her iPhone 7. Her friend Trisha was the first who bought and used it, but her other friends were interested in Sandra's opinions. Sandra is a blank in this product category, and the options are either innovator, early majority, early adopter, or late majority. What our junior tutor said is that from the information given, there are innovators and early adopters. Innovators are the first consumers to adopt a new product. These are the consumers who are always willing to pay a high price to be the first to have something. Thus, Trisha is an innovator who first bought iPhone 7 from her group. Early adopters, on the other hand, are the second group of people who adopt the product technology after the innovators. After Trisha, Sandra is the second individual who has purchased that iPhone. It can, therefore, be said that Sandra is the early adopter. Third option, early adopter, is therefore the correct answer. So as far as the kind of ranking here goes, I guess, first is going to be the innovator. I'm sure we all have that friend that second something new drops, they're on it right away, regardless of the price. Right now, I guess that's, whoever of your friends bought the iPhone 12 right away. Then we'll have early adopters. So there's going to be people that, maybe wait a couple months. They might ask that one friend, hey, how much do you like the iPhone 12? They say, I love it, whatever. Then they get on it. So this is kind of the next wave people. After that, we'll have the early majority. So this is when a product has become mainstream. Maybe like in current time, you can think of like what maybe the iPhone 8 or iPhone 10 is now, where it's a couple models back. Most people have, at least that model or something newer at this point. Then there's the late majority. Just as everybody has that friend that's on the newest phone right away, we also have that friend that's still rocking like a BlackBerry Bold with an iPod Touch combo, and maybe now they're just finally getting like an iPhone 8 or something. This is the late majority. These are the kind of the last people to come around to new technology. Yeah, that answers the question. What is the relationship between externalities in environmental and natural resources, quality enjoyed by a large and diverse community, and the ownership rights of members of that community? Do the postulates of the Coase theorem offer a possible solution to address related contentious issues among residents? Please state preconditions or postulates needed for using the Coase theorem, then explain if they would be met to obtain a resolution of related externality issues. So basically what the Coase theorem says is, given a dispute, an efficient outcome can be reached That says reached. I have to take my word for it. Given a dispute, an efficient outcome can be reached if property rights are assigned. And there are no transaction costs. All right, so this question asks, one more time, maybe the Coase theorem says that given a dispute, an efficient outcome can be reached if property rights are assigned and there are no transaction costs. So for example, you can think of a situation where, say a family has a river in their backyard and there's a factory upstream that is polluting in the river. Obviously, the family doesn't want the river polluted. There's going to be less fish. It's going to lower property values, etc. And the factory upstream also wants to pollute the river because it allows them to produce more of their product, whatever. Coase theorem basically says that as long as property rights are assigned, so either the factory is given the right to pollute or the family is granted the right to stop the factory from polluting, then an efficient outcome can be reached as long as there are no transaction costs. So transaction costs in this case might be like lawyer fees or something like that. So if the factory were assigned the right to pollute, the family could pay them to pollute less up until the point where the equilibrium was reached. Similarly, if the family were assigned the property rights and the factory weren't allowed to pollute, the factory could pay the family an amount to pollute until they reached equilibrium. An example is going to be the factory and stream. That's, I think, one of the common examples. Another one people use often is like noise pollution. Super noisy factory next door. There's a family that can't sleep, etc. So maybe they pay them to not work after a certain time so the family can sleep, etc., etc. Our junior tutor, I said that externalities are external forces impacting society both in a positive and negative way. To be more specific, like you can have a positive externality which impacts it positively and a negative externality which impacts it negatively. Largely, positive externalities take place especially in public goods. So natural resources are a part of public goods and its distribution in the hand of the government, which also creates the problem of free riding. Free rider problem is when somebody enjoys the benefit of something without having to pay for it. The ownership right makes it difficult to clear. That is why externalities become negative, as ownership is not identified. Ronald Coase, famous economist, discusses economic efficiency and its allocation in the presence of externalities. These externalities occur due to transaction costs. Bargaining power gets reduced due to limited information. The residents face higher price discrimination in the market, and for example, why allocation is not evenly distributed. He explains the problem of social cost, where property rights always mattered, and why a clear definition of property rights was necessary under zero transaction costs. Change will eliminate divergence and lead to efficient use of resources. So in the example I gave, property rights are assigned either to the factory or the stream. There are no transaction costs, and as a result, one party is able to pay the other in order to reach their desired outcome. This will make resource allocation and distribution extremely efficient. I think it's a good answer. I think between me and him, we covered the question we're looking for. Me and him, or her, I should say. On to question 4. And question 4 reads, over the last decade, a new term, quantitative easing, has come into the vernacular of monetary policy. Prior to the relatively recent appearance of that term, however, the Federal Reserve, routinely engaged in periods of monetary easing and or stimulative monetary policy as economic and financial conditions warranted. Just want to make sure I give an exact definition of quantitative easing, or QE. So there's when a central bank, so the Fed in the United States, or the Bank of Canada in Canada, so Fed being Federal Reserve. In Canada, the Bank of Canada. Purchase long-term securities. Purchases long-term securities from the market, from the open market, aka open market operations. Probably a term you'll hear a lot as well throughout your undergrad. Open market to increase money supply. Okay, I'm pretty satisfied with that definition. So over the last decade, a new term, quantitative easing, has come into the vernacular. Vernacular means vocabulary of monetary policy. Pardon me. Looks like I'm going to survive. Okay. Prior to the relatively recent appearance of that term, however, the Federal Reserve routinely engaged in periods of monetary easing and or stimulative monetary policy as economic and financial conditions warranted. 1. Prior to the advent of the term and concept of quantitative easing, how did the Fed signal or announce an easing of monetary policy, and how did they carry out said policy? And 2. Why did the Fed switch to the language of quantitative easing rather than merely continue with that of earlier times? So the answer to the first question, before the concept of quantitative easing, Fed used to adopt easing of monetary policy by engaging in open market operations, as I mentioned earlier, and or changing interest rates like discount rates and reserve rates so as to ease out the liquidity process in the economy, thereby decreasing money supply in the economy. So obviously the coronavirus hit recently. As a result, many governments have taken to reducing the overnight interest rate, thus making it easier to borrow. And so there's more liquidity and people are freer to spend. 2, Why did the Fed switch to the language of quantitative easing rather than merely continue with that of earlier times? And 2, after looking at the success story of quantitative easing in Japan, who was the first to implement it, the Fed switched to quantitative easing. Japan first used quantitative easing in 2000 during periods of severe deflation. When this policy proved to be successful and Japan survived the deflation successfully, the Fed in US also followed it on the same lines. You should note that quantitative easing is only used in exceptional times, such as periods of low deflation or hyperinflation. Maybe I'll just add the money market graph. Here we've got quantity of money. Demand for money falls, and the supply is straight up. I'm just going to Google it quickly because I always forget how to properly label the axes, and I don't want to lead anybody in the wrong direction. Nominal interest rates. So what the effect of this is effectively an increase in the money supply. Call it MS prime. It's going to move to the right. There's now going to be more money in the economy, so that's why we move to the right. The quantity of money is larger. And we're going to move from this initial equilibrium down to this new equilibrium. And as a result, we are going to have lower interest rates. Call this I prime, this one I. And this is exactly what we're seeing right now with the coronavirus. In order to prop up the economy is one way they usually say it. They've undertaken some kind of quantitative easing. So what we're effectively doing is increasing the money supply and lowering the interest rate. I used to know a bit more about the deflation in Japan. I think it's a pretty interesting case study, if I remember correctly. So if you wanted to look into that, I'd recommend it. Good answer by our junior tutor there. In 1978, China introduced its one-child policy to limit population growth. Due to selective abortions, this has led to an enormous increase in the male-female sex ratio at birth, whereas the ratio of males to females is normally 101 to 100, aka nearly even. In China, it is as high as 120 to 100. So there's a much larger amount of males being born than females. There's 100 males born for every 83 females. Question A, what would this new sex ratio do to the bargaining power of women in the marriage market? B, it has become part of Chinese modern folklore that for a male to marry in China, it is important for the male to own a home first. If this is true, would it be consistent with your answer in A, briefly explain? And C, in August 2011, the Chinese government passed a series of new marriage laws. One of them stated that upon divorce, the ownership of the home goes to the person who paid for it. The home is not considered marital property to be divided. Given your answer to B, what type of problem is properly developing in the marriage market, and how would this law prevent it? I've never thought of marriage this way, so this is going to be an interesting question. So our junior tutor to A reads, what would this new sex ratio do to the bargaining power of women in the marriage market? And I would think there's going to be a lower supply as a result of higher demand. The high sex male to female ratio suggests that the proportion of males exceeds females. Therefore, this implies women will have higher bargaining power in the marriage market. since they will have a great variety of men to select from. This gives women a competitive advantage. This further suggests that women exercise greater bargaining power once married, since they know they have a huge variety of men to choose from, and this may make them not be in dire need of their husbands. Further, this indicates that women will become scarcer in the marriage market, as every man will want to have one. This may result in women wanting to have more than one husband, which is not common in the case of women. I have zero idea if that happens empirically in China. It is actually a super interesting exercise. I wonder if there's anywhere else that has these almost artificial male-to-female ratios. B. To be on part of Chinese modern folklore that for a male to marry in China, it's important for the male to own a home first. This is true. Would it be consistent with your answer in A? B. Since men are available in abundance compared to women, it means women will choose men who are well off and have their own homes. Thus, the fact that women have greater bargaining power will indeed force men to work hard and own a house, so at least women can agree to be married them. And I guess it also shrinks the supply of men available to women. If originally we would have looked at it, there's a set number of women and a set number of men. But if we add a constraint that there's a set number of women and a set number of men with houses, there are now less men to choose from, and as a result, women would have slightly lower bargaining power, depending on the proportion of men that own houses. Part C, in August of 2011, Chinese government passed a series of new marriage laws. One of them stated that upon divorce, the ownership of the home goes to the person who paid for it. The home is not considered marital property to be divided. Given your answer to B, what type of problem was probably developing in the marriage market, and how would this law prevent it? And answer to C, our junior tutor for C said the problem developing is economic dependence, which encourages women to rest on their laurels and not rest. The reason being, if women marry because a man is well off in terms of owning a house and having enough funds, implies that women would not work hard, but rather look for people who are already well off. Thus, the fact that women will not be involved in economic activity, but relies on men's wealth, implies a decline in the economic cavity and GDP. Similarly, the divorce law implies that women will be forced to live with their husbands, even if they want to divorce, since they will be homeless upon divorcing. Also suggests that even after divorce, women will be after men who already have their homes and are well off. All in all, this law implies women will always be dependent on men and not work for themselves. I'm trying to think. So if there's a set number of women and the dating pool shrinks from all men to just men with houses, the problem that was likely happening was women were going after men with houses, marrying them, and then divorcing them to get a piece of their pie, essentially. Because obviously, if it's custom in China that for a male to marry, he must have a house, women are then interested in those men, at least partially for their wealth. So there's probably a lot of marriages that soon ended in divorce, with the woman walking away with more than she had going in. So that's probably the problem that was developing the marriage market, and this law would prevent marrying for that reason, because they know going in that they wouldn't get a piece of the house. Interesting case study. Again, I'm just kind of going off the top of my head, and I don't think I necessarily agreed with everything our junior tutor said here. I bet there's some really interesting research articles written about this issue, and I'd recommend looking into them if this question piqued your interest. Quick second here. All right. Macroeconomic principles, gross domestic product, is the market value of all final goods and services produced within a country in a given period of time. A, name the contents of the 4 components of expenditure. So we're going to have output equal to consumption plus investments plus government spending, net of taxes and transfers, if I remember correctly, and net exports, which is made up of exports minus imports. Junior Tutor said components of expenditure are personal consumption expenditure, so that is C here, consumption for short. Gross domestic private investment, that is I here, investment for short. Government spending on goods and services, G, and net exports, which is made up of exports and imports. Each one of these 4 gets pretty specific. Like you can drill down pretty far to determine like what counts as consumption, what counts as investment, etc., etc. It can get pretty complex. B, what is meant by nominal GDP? How does it differ from real GDP? And how is the latter calculated? Junior Tutor said B, nominal GDP is the value of goods and services produced within the economy during a period, using that period's prices for each good. Does not take into account inflationary effects. That's a key point. Nominal does not take into account inflationary effects. But real GDP is the value of the final goods and services produced within the economy over a period of time, using the prices of each good for a specified base period. This is an inflation-adjusted measure that reflects purchasing power. So basically, real GDP, or pretty much any time you hear an economist use the term real, just means it's adjusted for inflation. So you've probably heard your grandparents say, like, I don't know, they could buy a car for like 35 cents back in their day. They're speaking in nominal prices. What the actual amount of money they would have spent then is. If they were speaking in real terms, with inflation over the years, it's going to be a whole lot more. C, the government portion of expenditures in the GDP does not include spending on Not include spending on transfer payments such as Social Security. Why are they excluded? I don't know what textbook this is referencing. But our junior tutor said C, transfer payments are unilateral payments made by the government for which no service is received in return. That is why it is excluded from GDP. I don't have anything to add to that. That is the correct answer, perfectly worded. Unilateral payments is kind of the keyword maybe. And D, give reasons as to why a higher GDP can be assumed to engender greater well-being in the people whose endeavors attained this elevation. Alternatively, explain why a larger GDP appears not to make people any happier. What is... I've never heard this word in my life. Engender. Cause or give rise to. Interesting. Regardless, I know a little bit more about the relation between GDP and happiness, so I'll probably speak on that one. Looks like our junior tutor did here as well. A larger value of GDP does not make people happier because 1. GDP does not measure the standing of living or increase in population growth rate. 2. GDP ignores the effects of technological changes or quality changes in goods and services. And 3. GDP may increase without increasing resident welfare. For example, higher defense spending will increase GDP, but will not make its residents better off. And there's a couple things that go into this. One is that utility, there's no actual measurement for happiness. You can say, oh, I'm really happy today, or I'm not as happy today. But you can't say that you were like 72 units of happy yesterday and now you're only 47 units of happy today. So you can't really say that. All you can say is that it's ordinal, meaning I was happier yesterday than I was today. And another thing is that GDP is an imperfect measure. So GDP doesn't account for inequality, etc. GDP can be increasing while inequality is also increasing. That may be happening in the States right now, where the rich are getting much richer, and some of the poorer people in society are either getting poorer or staying the same. So GDP can be increasing, but welfare can be decreasing overall. And lastly, although happiness is tied to income, it's not perfect. There are people that have all the money in the world and are very unhappy, and there are people that are poor and quite happy. I don't think I have anything else to add. Although maybe I mentioned that GDP was an imperfect measure. There's something called the Gini coefficient, which is a number between 0 and 1 that measures the economic equality of a country or a nation. And I believe there's a relatively strong correlation between countries with a higher Gini coefficient and the happiness of the people that live in that country. Don't quote me on that, though. Look into it yourself. Be responsible. What's the difference between monopolistic competition and perfect competition? Janine The Tutor said, many features of monopolistic competition and perfect competition are similar, and the difference between them is differentiated products. This is correct. The most important thing is that their products are differentiated. In monopolistic competition, there are differentiated products, and in perfect competition, there is a homogeneous product. Due to differentiated products, firms in monopolistic competition spend on advertisement to popularize their product and increase their market share. In perfect competition, there is no need for advertisement because all products are identical. So we can go through what they have the same. There are going to be many buyers and sellers. I did this the other day and I'm just completely blanking on characteristics. I must have written them out like 20 times at this point. Similar products is another one. So in the case of perfect competition, the products are going to be identical, whereas in the case of monopolistic competition, products are going to be differentiated. Perfect information. So buyers and sellers both know exactly how much the product costs. This is opposed to asymmetric information, which you can think like if you're bidding for something on eBay, the seller can see the number of bids that have come in, prices all of them, but you bidding can only see the most recent price. So there's going to be asymmetric information there. No transaction costs. This doesn't mean, and this confused me in first year, this doesn't mean that the product doesn't cost anything. This means that there's no cost to purchase the product. So for example, if you went to the grocery store and in order to check out and pay for all the items in your cart, you had to pay $5, that would be a transaction cost. And they also have to 5, no barriers to entry. In other words, free entry and exit. Firms can join the industry freely, and they can also leave it freely. So the same in this way, where they're different is product differentiation happens in monopolistic competition. So with perfect competition, the prices are maybe like, or the product story is maybe like mushrooms at the grocery store. If you go to the grocery store, looking to buy some mushrooms, as long as the 2 packs of mushrooms have the same amount of mushrooms in them, you probably don't really care where they came from. So if one of the packs for, I don't know, 10 mushrooms costs $2, and one of the packs for 10 mushrooms costs $5, you're obviously going to get the $2 one because they're just mushrooms, they're all the same. So as a result, if you go over that price in perfect competition, so with mushrooms, nobody's going to buy it. And if you go under the price, you're pricing under marginal cost, and you would take losses by making it. The difference then is with differentiated products in a monopolistic competition. We're talking things like restaurants or haircuts. So you might be in the mood for a burger, but there's going to be very differentiated products. So you can go to McDonald's and get like a junior chicken for like $2 or whatever, or maybe you're going to go to like the Works and sit down and pay $15 for your burger. So as a result of their products being differentiated, all of these companies, these firms, they advertise heavily to convince you to buy their burger. And they'll be marketed towards different demographics and things of that nature. Do you have anything else that covers it? On to question 8. When does market failure occur? Our junior tutor said that market failure occurs when the market fails to generate the most efficient outcome. In the most efficient outcome, there is the maximization of surplus. All the consumers and producers are in the best position. When this does not happen, we say that there is a market failure. Market failure occurs in the following cases. 1. Public good, when the good is non-rival and non-excludable. 2. With externalities, when the benefit costs of economic activity is passed on to others in society. 3. Monopoly, when there's only one seller who produces less and charges a higher price. And 4. Imperfect information, when some people have more information about the market than others. So first I will draw a supply and demand graph that you've seen 100 times. Q and P. And we've got supply sloping up and demand sloping down. And we've got the equilibrium, or the market clearing price, where they meet. So you draw it down, that's the equilibrium quantity. Draw left, that's the equilibrium price, or the market clearing price. And because it's at the equilibrium, we are in an efficient market. So a market failure occurs when there's like more supply than demand. Sorry. So if there's, the price is raised too high, we'll call this P star, and there's more supply than demand. Then we have this quantity supplied up here, and the quantity demanded will be down here. As a result, because there's more supply than demand, we're going to have a surplus. Then everything in here is going to be dead weight loss. Oh, there's actually a really good example of a price floor. So if a price floor is set above the equilibrium, aka the government forces those in the industry to charge a higher price than the equilibrium price, then the quantity supplied is going to be more than the quantity demanded, and we're going to have a surplus of whatever it is. The loss, which is characterized as to the left of supply and demand, to the left and above supply, and to the left and below demand, it's going to be the deadweight loss. I'm not going to go through all of these examples here. Maybe we can just do the public good real quick.